Thank you, Pat. And thank you, friends and colleagues of the Ethical Society. I want to speak to you today about matters of concern to me about the society, this society, our society, and about the wider society of our country. Share with you some of the concerns I have and perhaps things that we might do to make our contribution, however limited it may be, to making things a little better. So let me just say a little bit about my personal involvement. Pat gave sort of some of the official aspects of it. But really, I have been motivated in my life to promote, to fight for human dignity, for human rights, mutual respect, social justice, and to do it by promoting the democratic empowerment of human beings in the cooperative endeavors and advancing things like ecologically sustainable economic development. And I've done it in part by joining the ethical movement. It's been a pleasure for me to be part of a movement which shares and promotes those values. I actually joined the movement by meeting Arthur Dober on a picket line at the Rusty Scupper many years ago, promoting the opposition to Nestle's promoting infant formula in the third world and the negative effects that had. So the very foundation of my involvement with the ethical movement comes really in responding, in addressing issues of social justice. And the Ethical Society, of course, is committed to respecting the integrity and worth of all human beings without regard to ethnicity, nationality, race, religion, or politics. And that, as we often say, we choose to attribute worth to all human beings and to promote policies and programs that enhance human dignity and human well-being. And I take that quite seriously. So in my political engagements, before and after and during being part of the ethical movement, I've sought to pursue that question, and even at present seeking to advance the community engagement of the members of the ethical movement at present. And that is meant in the more general sense to pursue the vision that Michael Harrington so beautifully set forth when he talked about being the left wing of the possible. But that often means avoiding the twin dangers, the Scylla and Charybdis, as one might say, of ethical purity on one side and practical compromise, right, and selling out, as it were, on the other. And trying to find some way of maintaining that kind of balance, the balance in which you never lose sight of the vision and the values that you care for and you fight for, but that you recognize that issues are always far more complex and you need to engage the world where it is if you want to transform it into a better place. And if you fail to do that and you seek to impose your vision rather than seeking to work with the world that you're involved in, you end up engaged in a kind of oppressive engagement. The danger of this effort of ethical purity often can become quite destructive. I'm often reflected upon how destructive it can become. Give you just a couple of brief examples. In the anti-slavery movement in the 1840s, refused to have truck with anybody who was at all involved with questions of slavery. So they formed the Liberty Party and refused to support Henry Clay running for president in 1844 on the campaign to limit the expansion of slavery on the hope that it would continue to die out. The Liberty Party was quite successful. Right? They were able to deny Clay the support of the state of New York. And because he did not get the support of the state of New York in the 1844 election, James Polk was elected president and then carried out the invasion of Mexico and the Mexican-American War. Right? That was his platform. But we know it much more recently. We know the purity of the Green Party and Ralph Nader in the year 2000, which brought us the Gulf War. and the war against terror, the invasion of the Middle East, right? That's something that I often encountered in my organizing with the Progressive Coalition also, and constantly torn between the ideals that you fight for and the ability to realize them, and having to deal with the fact that so often people get so caught up in their ideals that they can't understand the consequences, the necessity of dealing with the reality they're dealing with, and the necessity of it. We were forced on occasion, I remember years ago, to refuse to endorse a progressive liberal in the first congressional district in Eastern Long Island, George Hochberkner, who was a Roman Catholic, very progressive on all issues, but a Roman Catholic and not supporting abortion. So that was absolutely forbidden, right? And we ended up with a series of right-wing Republicans, most recently Lee Zeldin, right? The consequences of that kind of purity. But there also is a process that takes place within organizations, the process of what you can call groupthink, right? A process of unspoken, often unspoken social pressure, in which the moral purity and the ideal vision of the organization and of its leaders tends to make it impossible to deal with this disagreement, tends to make it impossible to think, right, that problems are somewhat more complicated, and that simple answers and simple solutions, pure as beautiful as they seem, can often be self-destructive, can in fact be oppressive, right? So many of you know my experience with the Progressive Coalition. I mean, 40 years involved in trying to develop an effective progressive organization, which always sought to put forth a systemic and radical analyses, and then figure out ways to practically move and implement them, always struggling with the dangers, number one, coming from the outside of selling out in order to be effective and get funding, grants, support from the established political organizations, but pushed usually from the inside, but not only from the inside, to stay true to one's ideals and not compromise, not sell out, not support a politician, right, because he doesn't sign on to every one of the criteria. For example, most recently, the Working Families Party refused to endorse, for example, Laura Curran, because her position on police reform was not adequately pure enough, and she wouldn't buy into the People's Plan. Although Laura Curran staked her reputation, right, on the reevaluation of the real estate taxes, in which over a period of 8 years, right, the Republicans had carried out basically a transfer of wealth from the poor to the wealthy of about $1 billion. She staked her career on that, but no one cared about that among the progressive community with which I was involved, right? Because she didn't sign on to the People's Plan, right? That's quite consistent with that kind of purity. And you know the result of that in terms of my experience with the Progressive Coalition. So these are some of the concerns that come that motivate me as I think about what we're facing in America today and what we're facing in the ethical movement itself. Right? I want to talk about both of those things, and that's what I want to talk about with you today: the real profound challenges we're facing, and the ways in which we are even contributing unintentionally sometimes to those challenges. So let me say what I want to talk specifically about. All right. I want to talk internally about what the society, what the progressive movement in general, the ethical movement particularly, is doing and doing wrong, which is contributing or weakening our capacity to confront the challenges facing us. And I want to talk at the wider sense about the radical nature of the challenges that we as a society are facing, and what we can conceivably do about it. But let's really face the challenge, and I don't want to understate it. What is happening right now in this country, right, is that we are confronting, led by what I would call the Trumpian MAGA movement, right, which has effectively taken over the Republican Party and under the aegis of what is called the big lie, that the election was stolen, right? They have taken over the Republican Party. What they are doing now is carrying out a slow-moving, effective coup d'etat, right? This is no longer politics as usual. If we think it is politics as usual, we are simply missing what is fundamental, right? What do I mean by that? Well, we all understand the kind of electoral disenfranchisement which has been going on, right? Most recently, we saw it in the obvious sense in Texas. I'll come back to that in a moment. And we know what that disenfranchisement generally means in limiting the access to the vote on the part of Blacks and Hispanics and Native Americans, but poor people in general, college students even, right? In all kinds of ways. We watched that take place in Georgia. There are now 30 states in which there are movements, at least 30 states. There are 14 or so which have actually passed legislation to limit access to the ballot, right? Make it more difficult for people to vote, right? And that is serious, and that needs to be countered, right? But that really is not the key to it. The key is much more fundamental than that, right? It's not simply our response is not simply to increase education among those who are potentially disenfranchised, to mobilize, to educate, and promote them.
With half and half?
No. All right, good, okay. It's not simply to do that. That's important, fine, that's good. And I'll come back to that. That's worth doing, and that's why HR 1 and HR 4 before, or now the Right to Vote Act that is recently put forth in the Senate. Those are important, right? And that's worth doing, right? And it's important to increase voter representation and mobilization. Those are all important things to do. But what is central to what is being carrying on now is much more fundamental, right? Right. And it really relates to what, in fact, Trump tried to do. Trump in leading up to, around, right after the election, around January 6th and thereafter, tried to carry out a coup d'etat, and he failed, right? But he came much closer than we realized, right? Right? He was on the verge of getting the Department of Justice to issue a memorandum saying there were serious problems with the electoral vote. Check out the Jeffrey Clark memo if you wish to, right? All of the top heads of the Justice Department threatened to resign if that memo were to go forth, right? We know about his call to Georgia, right? What in fact Trump did was try to use all means at his disposal, ultimately to get Mike Pence, right, to refuse to certify the vote on January 6th. That's why the mobilization that took place then. And had Pence did it, and he came close. He in fact looked for a way to justify doing it on numerous occasions. And had he done that, the election would have been thrown into the House of Representatives, and where the election would have been taken, the vote would have been done not by representatives, but by states. And of course, the Republicans have 27 states that they control in the House of Representatives, to the Democrats 23, and Trump would have been elected, right? So that came very close. But what did the Republicans do? What they did is they realized where were the weak points in the system? Where could the system be changed and challenged? And they have gone about threefold, right? To politicize the administration of elections. Those are the key parts of the Arizona legislation, for example. That's the significance of this Arizona audit and and the forthcoming Wisconsin audit and the Pennsylvania audit, right, to delegitimize the election, any election, to politicize the administration of the election procedures, right, and to replace the elected officials with partisan hacks who will do their bidding. Right? Put those three things in place. Had that been the case in this past election, he'd have won hands down. I mean, I don't know how people would have responded. He probably would have gotten away with it. So that is taking place now, right? It is ongoing. It is systematic. It is continual. Right? It is not politics as usual. And if we think it is politics as usual, and if we're dealing with two democratically oriented political parties, we're simply playing by an outmoded playbook. Now, clearly the media presents it that way. Newsday presents it that way. Most people think of it that way, but that's not the reality. So we need to understand that, and we need to then say, what can we do about it? Right? So that's part one. What can we do about it? How are we done? First, we need to understand it. I won't go into any greater detail here. All right, we only have a half an hour, so I just want to put it out there and make us clear about that. But understand that the way Trump focuses and organizes that is to delegitimate the election, number one, and number two, to make it seem like this is a struggle between whites and blacks over the future of America. And if you can make it a racial issue, he wins also. There are simply far more whites than blacks in America. Right? Now let's just look at the election. How did Biden win, and what did Biden do that was different from Hillary? Well, we know that Hillary won by 3 million votes nationally, but lost by the Electoral College by 306. We got 306. The exact number of the electoral votes, by the way, that Biden got, 306 to 233, I think, but I'm not sure the exact number. Right. But in fact, the 3 million that Hillary won by was leading, obviously, right? Trump actually won by 77,000 votes. He got majorities combined in 3 states: Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Okay. So Biden came along, and we know that he won by over 7 million votes. Sounds like overwhelming. Of course, if you take New York and California out of that, it's 50-50. But in fact, Biden actually won the Electoral College by 45,000 votes. 45,000 votes out of 160 million. Where were they from? Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona. You take those 3 out, Biden doesn't win. It's actually, it gets thrown to the House of Representatives and Trump wins. 45,000 votes. All right, so what was the difference between Hillary's vote and Biden's vote? Well, in fact, Biden lost about 5% of the vote of the Black community that Hillary had gotten. About 5% less than Hillary got. He lost about 9 or 10% less of the Latino vote than Hillary got. Right? So where did he make it up? Huh? Well, from white suburban women and from white, non-Hispanic white males without a college degree. He gained 4%. 4% roughly. He didn't do well with them, right? But the difference was sufficient, right? And in fact, of course, if you look at the actual election, Biden got more votes from whites than he got from blacks and Hispanics combined. Not a higher percentage, obviously, but more total votes. What is the significance of that? Right? What is the significance of that? Right? Well, that's part of what we have to think about, right? So how do he make up that difference? Well, in part, he addressed those issues. Right? In fact, if you were to look at his, if you want to understand part of the significance of his infrastructure plan, or if you look at his State of the Union address, he made it very clear the importance of providing jobs, unionized jobs, jobs that did not require a college education. But what is the reality behind that? That's the fascinating issue. It's a fascinating issue for the ethical society, since we care about all human beings. Right? Over the last 20 years, there has been an absolute devastation among the lives of non-Hispanic whites, male and female, without a college degree. Right? While throughout the entire 20th century and into the 21st century, almost all demographics in the Western world have shown increasing life longevity, with the sole exception of the period of time from the Spanish flu in 1919. Right to the present time. And that's for Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, Eastern Europeans, Western Europeans, increasing longevity, life. Except among non-Hispanic whites in America. In America alone, not in Europe, in America alone, since the late 1990s. That community has been devastated. Were they to have continued on the normal trajectory of life expectancy, more than 600,000 more would be alive today. This is what the expert economist from Princeton, Case and Deaton has recently received the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2015, what they have documented in their book, Deaths of Despair. Deaths from suicide, opioids, and alcoholism. Has ravaged that community of whites, male and female, in America, across the country, not just in the Rust Belt, but in Suffolk County, right? Across the country. That community has been ravaged and devastated, right? In a way which is absolutely unprecedented, right? But what does a community like that hear from the progressive community, from the ethical society? Have we had one speaker here who has expressed any concern for what is happening among white people without a college degree in this country? I cannot recall one. What do they hear from us? And I say us, I mean the ethical movement, the American Ethical Union, or the progressive movement in general. I am a state official of the Working Families Party. I'm involved, as we all know, with the New York State Community Equity Agenda. Right? We all are so concerned, and rightfully, with the condition of Blacks and Hispanics and Native Americans. Yes, rightfully. But where's our concern for a community that has been devastated? A community which, the greater the devastation, the greater the vote for Donald Trump and his ilk, because they see themselves despised and insulted by the intelligent, urban-based, progressive intellectuals whose heart bleeds for the Black and brown community, but shows no concern, no interest. Says in one sense, We care for all human beings. We attribute worth to all human beings, but in point of fact, does not seem to care or attribute worth, right, to these people, right? The people precisely who made the difference in a strange kind of way, giving Biden's election versus Hillary's. Right? It gets worse, and you see the way this plays out. How we even play into the right-wing racialization of our dialogue, the right-wing racialization of our strategies. Give you just one example, which struck me. Right? If you remember when those representatives fled from Texas, the Democratic representatives fled from Texas, right, to try and stop the Texas Republicans from the transformation of the electoral system there, both to reduce the capacity of the vast majority of people to vote, particularly poor people, Black, Hispanic, but also college students and disabled people, right? But also to politicize the election process and to encourage people to harass election workers, as they have done and has taken place at elections already in recent time. Right? They came to Washington, and they got covered by the media. And I'll give you just one example to show you the way in which well-meaning progressives played into the Trump story. Right? I'm watching Chris Hayes, and Chris Hayes is covering this outrage that's taking place in Texas, and he wants to cover the Democratic representatives that are fled the state, right, and are seeking to avoid the quorum that the Republicans would need. And he interviews these people. Every one of the people he interviews is Black or Hispanic. Not one white person. But this was the attack. What was the attack on? It was the Republican Party trying to destroy the capacity of the Democrats to be effective opposition. Right? It was a multiracial attack. But the approach was Republicans are attacking the Black and brown community. And then to cap that off, I mean, the commentators were brought on, particularly Elie Mystal of The Nation, often brought on, whose theme is always, it's a racial issue. Blacks are always being attacked by whites. That was the theme. They're just simply saying, this is a black-white issue. Well, if this is a black-white issue, I mean, you're just playing into the Trump national story, and you lose. All right? You just lose. All right? So we do that more generally, though. We do it in the ethical movement. Right? Right? We celebrate things like critical race theory. Right? And we're so comfortable talking about white fragility and white privilege. Right? What does it mean? How does it sound, right, to people whose community is devastated, who are dying, literally dying, and of course, of those who are dying, vast numbers, others are in pain of all sorts of pain, psychological and physical, addicted to opium, over taking alcohol excessively, right? There is a ravaging going on in this community for reasons which have to do, obviously, with the economic transformation of our society in many ways. I'm not talking about the reasons by it, though Case and Deaton discuss those in detail, and I invite you to read the book on Deaths of Despair. Right? But what does it sound to them when all they hear is white privilege coming from white liberals in New York, for example, right? Well-off people or Black activists, and their communities are ravaged and they are dying, and we're telling them, you're benefiting from white privilege. Right? You know, white privilege is nice as a theory, you know, all other things being equal, right? You know, generally in our society, white people are better off than Black people, all other things being equal. but all other things are never equal. They're never equal. Everybody's situation is unique and different. And people living in those communities are not benefiting from any privilege. They are being devastated. Where is the sensitivity? And what is the consequence of not having it? That's a concern. That is serious. And then we feel often well-meaningly we have to defend things like critical race theory, which attacks every value basically that the ethical society believes in with respect to the impartiality of justice, to the objectivity of science, right? To the advocation of reason, to the not organizing lives around quotas. Right? You go into it in detail, or people being outraged, right? Celebrating the New York Times story of the 1619 Project, even giving it a Pulitzer Prize when it's botched history, and when the woman who wrote it is denied tenure at the University of North Carolina. People are outraged. Right? She was denied tenure in the history department. She has no history. She has no history credentials. She produces a botched historical analysis. She takes something which is serious and important, very important. The 16, she could have done a really constructive historical analysis, but turned it into an ideological piece of counter racism. That's really what it comes down to. And then we feel, as well-meaning liberals, we have to support that. It's either we support Trump's racism or we defend the 1619 Project and Nicole Hannah-Jones. No. You have to find a way to understand the history of racism in this country, its systematic nature, and what is necessary to address it systematically without choosing to demonize American history and culture, without demonizing vast majorities of this country and our people, and turning over the American flag, as it were, to the opponents. Right? There's much more that could be said about that. But I'm not even going to talk. I don't want to talk here specifically, and I have to conclude shortly. I don't want to talk here specifically about the substantive issues. Or I'd be glad to do so, and I've written about it elsewhere, and glad to share that analysis with anybody. What I really want to focus on is the political consequences. I am concerned here only with that, the political consequences. And that we must take seriously. So what can we do about that? To be very brief, right? We need to make sure that our values are truly inclusive, multiracial, multi-ethnic, truly democratic, and really respectful of all elements of our society. And that our language represents that and expresses that, and that we then communicate those values among ourselves, among our family and friends, and among the communities with which we're involved. Right? And that we take that and we then seek to work to take that understanding, and then our understanding of the profound challenge being posed by the current MAGA movement's takeover of the Republican Party and its ongoing coup d'etat, and begin to make organizations with which we're involved aware of the scope and depth of that problem. Fortunately, we are not alone. That awareness is developing. It is emerging. I made a critical comment with respect to Chris Hayes, for example, a moment ago, and I think rightfully, but he has also been excellent in understanding the nature of this problem. Right? He's torn between these two different senses of values, right? And doesn't really pull them together appropriately. So he does play the racial code more than he should, but he understands what is happening at the political level. There are many others that are doing it. So it's not like it's not happening. We need to contribute that understanding, right, to the organizations with which we're a part. And that's part of the challenge of our social action project and our demo, which we will pursue, and those who want to be involved with us can certainly do so. I say us, meaning this is the Ethical Society Social Action Project, as we try to do what we can to contribute to an understanding of the political challenges that are confronting us and the ways in which we can combat them. And we can do that. We can combat them. And we can combat them But we cannot do it if we don't recognize the way in which the Trump movement is seeking to destroy the electoral process and to lay the groundwork, right, for the imposition of an authoritarian rule. So we can do it. Efforts are underway. There's more that can be done. The people are affiliated with other religions, like the Unitarians. Get them to be actively involved in promoting this, right? And get the other. When we'll talk about how that can be done in the weeks and months to come. There are many people involved in this thing, but we have to understand that it is a structural challenge to the very nature of our institutions. It is unprecedented, and it is taking place before our eyes, and we need to understand the scope of it. Letters to the editor, for example, there are many ways we can begin to address that, and we'll talk about that in a committee and have suggestions for other members of society, and I hope all of you will participate in different ways, given your time and energy. Thank you.